Well, hello, my friend. Welcome back to another episode of the From Chaos to Peace podcast, where I talk about how clutter is so much more than you think, and we put a spiritual twist on clearing that clutter to get organized. Thank you so much for allowing me back into your ears. Well, hello, my friend. I'm Conny, Graf, your host. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I want to talk about how and why clutter affects our lives beyond just the physical space, and also why clutter is considered an obstacle to personal growth and self-care. But first, let me ask you, what comes to mind when you hear the word clutter? Is it a messy house, an overflowing closet, a garage, or a basement filled to the brim? Or in your business, is it a chaotic desk, a bursting inbox, stacks of papers, or a mile-long to-do list with an unorganized computer, tablet, or phone? This all is definitely clutter, but that's basically only the physical and digital clutter. But clutter goes far beyond the physical and digital. I often say there is so much more to clutter than you think. Because there are many types of clutter that can hold us back, and often that holds us back without even us realizing it. For example, we also have financial clutter, which means you have no clear budget, you have no clear overview of your finances, you have no grasp on your income or expenses, you're just spending without purpose, you're basically robbing Peter to pay Paul, and so forth. There is also mental clutter, that's limiting beliefs, negative self-talk, constant multitasking, and overstimulation. That's the topic that I talk a lot about with my clients. I call this the inner bully or the inner gremlin, right? That constant nagging we have in our head. There's also social clutter, that's people-pleasing and overcommitting and never making time for yourself. That goes hand in hand often with the mental clutter because we think we need to. We have to accommodate other people. Other people come first before us. And all those thoughts that I think a lot of us have. Then there is also emotional clutter, that's stuffed down feelings, resentment, guilt, fear, worry, all these things that we don't want to deal with and we just shove them down, and further down. And then there's also such a thing as spiritual clutter, which is the disconnection from your values and from your higher self and feeling lost and out of alignment and just soldiering through the day somehow, right? But now are you surprised? Because most people, they get that there is physical and digital clutter, but really few realize how much mental, social, or emotional clutter is really weighing us down. And the mental, emotional, and spiritual clutter is not just the stuff that gets in our way. It is the stuff we hide behind. We hide behind these things. We hide behind our mental clutter. We hide by stuffing our emotions down, right? And just ignoring it. And it's that noise that drowns out our inner truth, that weight that keeps us small and that makes us feel resentment and guilt and worry and fear. And it's also the fog that blocks our clarity. This is all clutter. So today I want to dive a bit deeper into mental and emotional clutter because from psychology, we know the cognitive model or the thought, feeling, behavior model. And it's widely used in CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy. And I learned about this concept from my coach, Brooke Castillo, from the Self-Coach School. And she called it the model. And it goes like this. Our thoughts create our feelings. Our feelings influence the behavior and the actions we're taking. And then these actions and behaviors, they produce our results, right? And that comes from psychology. So that is how how they are interconnected, right? So I'll give you an example. If, for example, you have the thought, I should have decluttered by now, because maybe you had the goal to be decluttered. Maybe it was one of your resolutions for 2025, whatever. Doesn't matter. You just have this thought, I should have decluttered by now, or I should have decluttered already. Now ask yourself consciously, if you have this thought, how do you feel? And we try to identify one feeling, right? So one feeling you could feel, it's not wrong if you feel something else, but one that you could feel, and a lot of my clients feel, is overwhelmed, because you haven't done it yet. So if we go with overwhelmed, then you can ask yourself, when I'm overwhelmed, what actions would I take? Or inactions. A lot of times we can also identify inactions. So what would probably happen if you felt overwhelmed? You would avoid decluttering altogether, even though that's the whole point. You want to declutter. But when you're overwhelmed, you're avoiding decluttering. You might be scrolling on your phone, or you might be doing busy work, other work. You might be also jumping around and doing a bit here and doing a bit there without a clear plan and without real intention, and also not consistently. So then you would burn out and give up because you don't get the desired result, right? And so what then happens is, that's then the result line, that the result that comes from the thought that feeds the feeling that fuels the action, right? The result is then nothing really changes, or there is only minimal progress, or there is 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, right? The result is often also more chaos, more clutter that piles up. And that leads then to increased frustrations and the bully in your head bringing you nastier thoughts than, oh, I should be decluttered by now. I know from working with my clients and from my own life how nasty the bully can be. So then these nasty thoughts create even more frustration and more debilitating feelings that reinforce the original thought, and the actions aren't pretty, or the inactions, and the results are not what we want. So this is how this all works together. Now keep this example a bit in mind, because we will come back to it. But before, I want to talk a little bit more about mental clutter, because it might be sounding a bit abstract for some of you, or for you. So the example above was negative self-talk. And I often, when I work with my clients, I always say, like, can you ask yourself, when you think a thought like this, is it even helpful? Is it helpful when you say, oh, I should have been decluttered by now? I would argue it's not helpful. But let's examine real quick some other mental clutter. So other mental clutter is also, for example, limiting beliefs. Thoughts like, I'm not good enough, or I should already have this figured out, and I guess I'm not smart enough to not be having figured it out. Or one thing that a client often says to me is, I shouldn't need that much help or that much coaching. So that is limiting beliefs, right? Another mental clutter is old and outdated ideas that and also rules that you maybe impose on yourself that have nothing to do with your current life. They come from when you were young, maybe, or you heard them from your parents or from your teachers, but they have nothing to do with your current life. And still somehow the bully presents you with these outdated ideas and you believe them, right? That's also mental clutter. But also mental clutter is when you expose yourself to too much information aimlessly, and you just put it in your mind to the point that you actually lose focus of what's important, and you get frazzled and overwhelmed. And let me tell you, I'm a lover of learning, and I have to be very mindful of that I'm not just aimlessly put stuff in my mind because I enjoy learning, right? Like, we need to do something with the things that we're learning, because otherwise, what is it good for? But a lot of us, we really overwhelm our brain with too much information, and it's easy to do because we get bombarded with information every day, and our brain really doesn't know how to handle it. And we need to proactively guide a little bit how much information we're exposing ourselves to. And then also mental clutter, and I talked about that on the podcast before, is when you make no decisions and you just procrastinate and you always say, I need to have more information, or I can't make that decision yet, or you just refuse to make the decision. And you hear me say that a lot of clutter is actually because of unmade decisions. We are often so afraid to make decisions, and then we don't do anything. And this only creates even more clutter in our life and business, right? And then it weighs us down even more, and it's not pretty. So mental clutter is omnipresent, I would say. And you may also have heard me say on the podcast, if you're a long-time listener, that everything starts with mental clutter. And this is why I say that clutter is made by unmade decisions, because your mental clutter keeps you from making decisions. Mental clutter often also shows up as constant multitasking, the racing thoughts you have in your brain that you can't stop, and the looping to-do lists and all this craziness in your head, right? And so now you wonder, why is this mental clutter a block? Well, maybe I talked already a little bit about it when I went through this list, right? But it's also, mental clutter keeps you in a reactive mode. Keeps you in this putting out fires mode, and you're not responding, and you're not really considering your options, your priorities, and your values. No, because it's too much going on. Your brain is completely cluttered. This mental clutter drowns out your intuition and your clarity, and it keeps you chasing external validation a lot of time too, instead of slowing down to ask, what do I need right now? What is the right next step for me? And this is where we could say that self-development and growth doesn't really happen in a noisy mind, because there is no room for new thoughts or for new perspectives or for healing, for compassion for ourselves. And so to illustrate you this, think about how you can't plant new tender seeds in soil that is already overgrown with weeds. Something I battle with outside in my garden a lot. I have to clear the weeds first before I can plant something intentionally. It's the same with our brain, right? Okay, that was a lot. Let's take 3 deep breaths before we continue on. Okay, now that we calm down a bit, I want to shift gears. And how I said in the beginning, our thoughts determine our emotions and our feelings. So let's explore a little bit the emotional clutter and why the emotional clutter is an obstacle for self-development. So emotional clutter is hanging on to anger and frustration. It's also staying in victim mode instead of working through the emotions and processing them in order to let go and move on. It often happens because you have no routine or practice to examine and sort through your emotions on a regular basis, to make sense of them and to actually work through them. Like I said earlier, you're just suppressing them. You don't want to deal with them. You don't want to have anything to do with them. It's often also because we don't even know how to deal with them. I had to learn that too. What does it even mean to not push emotions down, or to not ignore them, or to not suppress them? What does it mean to actually deal with them, to examine them, right? So because we don't know, we try to suppress them so we don't have to deal with them. But then eventually it explodes like a pressure cooker, or it implodes. Like, depending on what type of person you are, you might implode or explode. I'm more likely to know to be exploding, so I have to be really mindful of that. So suppressed emotions are, for example, disappointments you haven't processed, you haven't grieved the disappointment, you haven't dealt with it, you haven't acknowledged it, you haven't had compassion for yourself that this happened to you, and you haven't moved on. And I have a few episodes around grief here on the podcast because grief is something we all can't escape. We all have it in our life. And it's also something that is so much more than just losing a loved one. Grief goes so much deeper. And there is also no timeline how fast we have to or can process grief or any emotional clutter for that matter. But I can tell you that if you don't address it, you will not solve it, right? So it has to be solved. But once you start looking at it, you can't put pressure on yourself that you have to process it within a certain amount of time. Sometimes it comes back and it comes back and it comes back, right? And we're just dealing with it. But when we're dealing with it, we can still move on. By dealing with it, we can move on. But when we don't process it at all, when we avoid the challenging feeling at all cost, and when we never address the topics to feel then better, that leads really to a lot of emotional clutter. So again, in short, it's suppressed feelings like grief, anger, resentment, regret. It's avoidance. Keeping busy to not feel anything, keeping busy to not realizing how disappointed or resentful you feel. It's also over-identifying with old wounds and hanging on to it, staying in victim mode, right? And why is then emotional clutter such a block? Well, unprocessed emotions influence our decisions, they influence our relationships, they influence our habits and our actions, but often without you even realizing it. You might self-sabotage, procrastinate, people please, not because you're lazy or because you can't do it or because you're not worth it or whatever crazy thoughts pop in your head or are presented by your bully, but because there is unacknowledged pain in the way. I have lived like that many years until I learned, mostly through the help of Brooke Castillo and her model and the self coaching, how to process it. And it's an ongoing thing. It's a little bit like clutter. You go on a journey and it's almost never ending, but that doesn't mean it's terrible. It's just self-development and growth, and decluttering can help you so much with it, especially decluttering the mental clutter that then leads you to the emotional clutter. And if you want to have an image to emotional clutter, then I present this image. It's emotional clutter is like trying to run with a backpack full of heavy stones. You can do it for a while, but it's very exhausting and you never get really where you want to go. But by unpacking these heavy stones one by one, you can keep going, right? And you will eventually end up where you want to end up. So now, before we wrap up, I want to go back to the earlier example, the thought, feeling, action, result example from the beginning, and take it maybe a little bit further. Because what I learned from Brooke Castillo is that each feeling leads to a different action or inaction. And when we're trying to identify what we're feeling, it's good when we're taking these feelings one by one at a time, and not just a whole list of feelings. So I started with the thought example, I should have decluttered by now, and I said we feel overwhelmed, and then we're jumping around and doing here and there a bit, but nothing really, and then we burn out and we give up, or we avoid decluttering altogether because we're doing busy work or we're scrolling on our phone, and the result is nothing changes or only minimal change, right? Minimal progress usually results in more chaos, clutter piling up even more, which leads to increased frustration, and so on. I talked about this before, but now we could also look at something different. Sometimes the thought I should have decluttered by now goes to a different feeling, to a feeling of shame. I have met so many people with so much shame because of their clutter and because they can't manage to declutter. And what do they do then? It's subtle change, right? But they hide even more from the task. They avoid about thinking about it. They distract themselves with something else. They numb themselves. They maybe go shopping and increase the clutter instead of what they actually wanted to make their life simpler and decreasing it. Other people start eating a lot. I have more than one episode, I think, with the connection between eating and clutter as well. I mean, clutter has an effect on our life in so many areas, right? The inaction of shame is also we are not decluttering and we are not addressing our emotional clutter at all, at no cost. We really hide shame. When you feel shame, and I'm sure you have felt shame before in your life. I don't know if you haven't, you're lucky, but I would say we all have. Just remember back how you really feel, what the result is, what your actions are from feeling shame. Most of us, we just go hide. We want to make sure nobody notices our flaws. We feel so unworthy, right? And this is a vicious cycle. And the results are not what we want. The result is also that we don't grow as a person. There is no self-development. Because we hide. We make us small. We freeze. I freeze. I definitely freeze. I don't do anything. I freeze. And so this is where then when you freeze, you probably don't do anything in your home. You don't clean up. You don't do the dishes. You don't do your bed. It just spirals out of control, right? So this is very, very heavy. But have you thought of these kinds of thoughts and feelings as clutter? Most people don't think of clutter to this extent. But this is why I'm here and always say like clutter is so much more than you think. It's not just physical clutter. The physical clutter is often the result of the mental and emotional clutter. And the physical clutter can also be what we hide behind. We use it as an excuse. We use the mess in the house as a distraction to keep us from addressing the more important things like creating goals or learning to communicate our needs, right? Then we say, I have to clean the house first. I can't do this, that, and everything because I have to clean the house first. All of a sudden, cleaning the house and tidying the house becomes more important than actually addressing the mental and emotional clutter. But this distraction and avoidance doesn't only keep you from more important things, it also hurts most likely your relationships with your loved ones around you. And again, it's really, really affecting the relationship that you have with yourself, and it's affecting your self-worth. And it keeps you stuck, right? So one of the reasons why a lot of people consciously or unconsciously resist to declutter and clean up their home or office is that if they would do so, they would not be able to hide behind that clutter and the chaos and the long to-do list and all this anymore. They wouldn't have an excuse anymore, and then they would have to face all these loud voices or the bully in their head. And all the unresolved emotions and experiences, they would have to deal with it because all of a sudden there would be space and then you would have to deal with this. But if you are willing to deal with this, you free yourself up from clutter inside and out. And that is how I say that decluttering helps you grow as a person. Decluttering is self-development. It's personal growth, right? You can learn that you can create more time and more energy in your life if you're not constantly overwhelmed by the chaos inside of you and outside of you. And this results in more positive thoughts, the bully becoming quieter, which then results in more positive feelings, right? And if we go back to that psychology that I talked about, is like our thoughts influence our feelings, and our feelings, the feelings are the ones that drive our actions or inactions. And so if you have more positive feelings, you have also you take more the actions that you really want to take, that you set out and had the intention to take. You do take these actions more. And then you have the results that you're looking for, right? And so this is why it's so important to understand that there is mental and emotional clutter and to deal with it. So clearing clutter, especially the unseen kind of mental and emotional clutter, is really an act of self-love. That's why I always say decluttering is self-love. It's saying I'm ready to know myself and I'm ready to take care of myself beyond the surface. My health matters. My self-development and my growth matters. My healing matters. Ultimately, my inner peace matters. Okay, so that was a heavy episode, but I really felt called to talk with you about this today. It was inspired by lots of conversations with clients and also by noticing my own bully in my head and my own suppressed feelings, because I do it too, right? Even though I know about all this, I have to be really conscious too. And I have to, like I talked about it, I have this practice to reflect. Do I suppress anything? What happened? Why do I feel bad? Can I identify the thought behind the bad feeling? Okay, I'll leave it at that for this week. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. Have a beautiful week. Talk to you next time. Take good care and stay at peace.